Okay, hello. Thank you for joining me, Miss Jasmine. My name is Kariana Lamio. This is an interview for my project on the Chicano movement down here in South Texas. Go ahead.
So hi everyone, my name is Jasmine Delgadillo. I'm currently a graduate student at Texas A&M International University in Laredo, Texas. I've been in the program since fall of 2018, and I decided to do double concentration in history and political science. That's why it's taking me a little bit long. During my undergrad years, my junior and senior year of college, I decided to pursue the Chicano movement in Laredo, thanks to Dr. Thompson, Jerry Don Thompson. Um, he told me, hey, you know what, you're interested in the Chicano movement, why don't you do this research? There hasn't been a lot of research done in the local movement here in Laredo. And I was like, yeah, go for it, I decided to go ahead and do it because I really wanted to see why was it that Laredo wasn't written about? And even people here, like, I had never even heard of it. So I decided to go ahead and do that. I had done interviews with people who had lived during the movement, who were part of it as well. And also, I started doing microfilm. I went to the library. I looked at all the microfilm from the Laredo Times back in the day, and that's how I was able to get my research as well. I also found some research on I forgot what university it's from, but I know it's here in Texas. It's a Black and Brown civil rights movement, and they had like a plethora of interviews that this project had done. So thanks to them, also I was able to contribute to the history.
Perfect. Thank you. So we're going to go do a couple general questions. Which Chicano revolutionary did you admire and why? And I know some people don't really have a revolutionary that inspired them. It's mostly done by because we are Chicano, we want to get involved with our movement. So if you don't have one that started it, which one have you come to admire and why?
So honestly, like how you mentioned, I don't have one like a prime figure that I admire per se. I do really appreciate the work of Dolores Huerta and all the Chicanas as well, because that has also been glossed over, unfortunately, in the Chicano movement. And there's this historian at UT. Her name, I forgot her first name, but her name is Dr. Blackwell, and she has this really amazing book dedicated to the Chicano movement. But with that being said, I really admire Dolores Huerta for her amazing work and contributions. And one of the leading figures that I admire personally, and because it was part of my research, that I didn't know who he was, and he really, he really went with his guns, and I really admire that. His name is Jose Chaca Ramirez.
Okay.
He was the one that brought in the leading figure of the movement. He actually studied at UT photography, and he was the one that was really, stirring up the pot and even writing in the movement. At the Laredo Junior College, he even wrote for the Ground Up. So I really admire because he stick to his gun. So I really respected that, especially here in Laredo. Later on, you find out as to why he played out a different role, but he still went with his guns, and I really admire that from him.
In Texas, do you feel that what do you feel that we contributed the most to the Chicano movement? What do you think Texas held on to?
Definitely the Raza Unida party, for sure. That partido really was an open door, what's it called? It really opened the doors to actually start the revolution. Having the Cuatro, stand up for the grounds there in Crystal City. That's what really, started to stirring up the pot, having the walkouts too. So even though, California had the walkouts, New Mexico had walkouts. I feel like here in Texas, when you read about the Chicano movement in a lot of books, they always emphasize that. So for sure, I feel like we were the crystallization of the movement.
And what do you feel the Chicano movement gave us Chicanos here in Texas? What do you think that kind of gave us as a people, as a culture?
I feel like it gave us a community. So, as Mexican Americans, we're so based on community and all of that good stuff. But I feel like this was, community in terms of trying to break in through the political powers and the political machines. So, having the mutual aid was something very pivotal that contributed to us. I feel that also because unfortunately here in Texas, we don't really reference ourselves a lot as Chicanos or Chicanas. We reference ourselves more as Tejanos or Tejanas, Tex-Mex, or just Mexican Americans. I feel like the movement, that epitome of Chicanismo, was more evident in California and New Mexico, Arizona, and so on and so forth. But I feel like here in Texas, just having that mindset of knowing that we were trying our best to make our voices being heard by the Democratic Party, because even the Democratic Party, unfortunately, really didn't hear us out. And that's one of the things that it's one of those situations where you feel like you're trying to break into the system, but the system doesn't really let you. So that's what happened.
Mhm.
But overall, I feel like just having that mindset, nevertheless, also we should be thankful at the fact that the Chicanos and the Chicanas, fought for our rights, because without them, a lot of us wouldn't have, institutions. Like, for example, Tammy U, it was
Mhm.
established because people were voicing out that, hey, we need a university here in South Texas. We don't have one. And that's why
Mhm.
it was brought in the 70s. So yeah, I feel like bringing in our needs and wants, we should be thankful to the Chicano movement because of that.
Okay. And in a generalization, even over in California, New Mexico, everywhere, where do you feel in general the Chicano movement legacy lies? Where do you think its legacy lies?
To be quite frank, in retrospect, we do have a lot of universities here in Texas that do cater to the Chicano studies, like
Mhm.
the one at UTSA, the UT, and so on and so forth. But quite honestly, I feel like the legacy is more appreciated in California. And the
Mhm.
reason why I'll say that is because in California, they're so proud to say Chicano and Chicana. And I
Mhm.
see it, even people, or even Latina owned or Latino owned companies, have the X in it.
Mhm.
um, and a lot of the Chicano stuff also can be tied into the decolonization process that a lot of people are going through. So, for example, me personally, I'm learning Nahuatl, or I was at one point, because right now I don't have the time, unfortunately.
Mhm.
But in that community, sometimes they still tie into the Chicano aspects of it sometimes. And
Mhm.
sometimes they're like, hey, you know what, even though we all say we're Chicanos, unfortunately that's still a colonial term. So they try to deconstruct it, but try to like break it down in a
Mhm.
sense, and then they go into depth about it. But I feel like in California you see more of that mutual way, that community organization. So I personally would say that in California more, because there's also even more universities over there that do the Chicano studies as well. Definitely. A lot of the people who were part of the movement, I noticed doing my research,
Mhm.
were based in California as professors. Even Jose Angel Gutierrez, I got to interview him, and
Mhm.
he moved to California too. So from Texas, he went all the way over there.
Oh
And I
wow,
actually
yeah.
had a friend that interviewed him face to face in person, so he had to go all the way over there to interview him.
Wow, that's great. And I know you did your own research
Mhm.
on the Chicano movement in Texas, specifically in Laredo. I know you had told me on the side of what you think kind of hindered it, but what do you think hindered Texas from flourishing in the movement in comparison to California?
Honestly, that's a really good question. I feel like based on what I've noticed is the legacy and the history. You have that Mexican American War, and then you have, the Texas Rangers and all the lynchings that a lot of people didn't know that Mexican
Mhm.
Americans went through.
Mhm.
And with that in mind, a lot of the, what's it called? A lot of the areas here were owned by Anglos. So I feel like a lot of the reasons why it didn't flourish as much was probably because they were afraid of the power dynamics.
Uh-huh.
They really felt like, we live in very rural areas. What can we do about it? We cannot just go ahead and pick up our bags and just leave. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
I feel like that might have been one of the reasons, because even though it's kind of like the same concept in California, I just feel like maybe here people were more afraid because of the Texas Rangers, or
Mhm.
just, that discrimination, that very eminent blatant discrimination of like either lynching you, doing something to you or to your family, and so on and so forth. I also feel that um, maybe it was based on the conservative values of, let's just go with the flow. It is what it is. We'll not be able to escape it. Um, I think that might be one of the reasons why. Also, politically wise, there was a lot of gerrymandering from what I remember as well. So maybe that's the reason why it wouldn't work out as efficiently.
Mhm.
Um, Also, the farm workers, there was actives once, because I remember in San Antonio there was, oh, I forgot her name, really prominent figure. I feel so bad for just forgetting her name. She was the one that did the boycotting in the Nueces factory. I don't know if you remember her or anything like that.
Mhm.
Um, Let me go ahead and quickly search her up, because
Yeah.
she's really, really pivotal. And there's a lot of these figures in the Chicano movement that have been unfortunately glossed over. Um, Emma Tenayuca. Emma
Mhm.
Tenayuca. This is back in the 1930s. So I feel like the farm workers were more, more prominent and more visible and more active earlier in Cali that were here in
Mhm.
a sense because you get the UFW later on. But here you already have people like Emma Tenayuca,
Mhm.
fighting for her rights. And even if we go a little bit back in time to the 1900s, we also had here in Laredo, Texas, Jovita Edad. She wrote against the Texas Rangers and against the blatant racism that we were going through. And so you have all of these leading figures that, they're trying to pave the way, but unfortunately didn't carry the momentum as much as it did in California, I would say.
Perfect. And what have you found in your research that you feel needs to be spoken about a lot more?
Oh, definitely is one of the things that when we think about the Chicano movement, we think, oh, civil rights, Mexican Americans.
Mhm.
But there's two pivotal things that I feel that need to be more emphasized and more learned about. So one of them first is how did the Chicano movement play throughout the border? We only
Mhm.
know about Laredo, but we don't know enough about, like, let's say El Paso, Brownsville. What about in Arizona, San Diego, and California? I think that would be a really great project if someone out there wants to do it, to see how the Chicano movement played in the border. Because, like, for instance, in my research, I found out that it didn't have to do with racial factors like it did in other cities or in other
Mhm.
states. It had to do more with the classism that we were going through and the socioeconomic factors that played out. And the second part is the Chicana movement that really needs to be highlighted and emphasized. I
Yes.
cannot stress that enough. Unfortunately, it gets glossed over a lot. And also, there was a lot of people that were part of the LGBTQ plus community that were part of it as well. So that also
Mhm.
needs to be emphasized. Their voices are very important. And there's this really good book from this professor, and he's from California, and he did it the Power Up Chicano book. I think that's the name of the book. I butchered it, but it's a really good book.
Mhm.
The second edition that he wrote, he literally said, like, I apologize for not reflecting the voices enough of the LGBTQ plus community, nor
Mhm.
did I emphasize enough the voices of Chicana. So see, it's a work in progress, and we're learning as
Yes.
historians, because the cool thing about the Chicano movement is that you have historians and interdisciplinary scholars, writing about what they did, and
Mhm.
then it's not that history that's super duper far away. They were still alive and they wrote about it and they became professors and taught it. And then
Mhm.
them, as being people of their time, they started reflecting years later and be like, you know what, I forgot to implement the LGBTQ community, or I forgot to
Mhm.
implement the women, and so on and so forth. So I feel like that's two of the most prominent things that we need to, take the time to really talk about it, because that, in retrospect, it really gives us a better picture and the macro
Mhm.
picture of the Chicano movement in general.
Thank you so much
Mhm.
for answering my questions. Thank you for taking the time to do this interview.
Oh, yes, of course. And thank you for, allowing me to pitch in my perspective and my work of study. And I really appreciate it very, very much.